Thank you very much. I was hoping to see Frank. I haven't seen him in a few years. Unfortunately, he is sick. I'm very happy that he invited me to come. I was here in Edinburgh once. That was in the spring of 1974. I was doing my PhD in London, and I came for a day. And again, I'm coming for a day. I hope that one day I'll come for a longer period to be able to enjoy this beautiful city. One thing that John didn't tell you was that this is a prison in Montreal, and I spent 3 years in that prison when I was young and foolish at the beginning of what we can call my career. I spent 3 years there trying to help prisoners reintegrate society, and towards the end of these 3 years I decided that I didn't want to spend my life in prison. So I decided to work with juvenile delinquents, trying to help them trying to prevent them from going to prisons. So essentially what I've been doing over the past almost 40 years is to go from adulthood to childhood to try to understand how people end up in prisons. This is data from Statistics Canada showing what criminologists call the age crime curve. It's indicating that with age, the chances of committing a property offense or a violent crime increases, and by the beginning of adulthood, it starts decreasing. The age crime curve can be observed in all our societies. This is data from the United States. And it was first described by Adolphe Quetelet. Adolphe Quetelet was an astronomer at the beginning of the 19th century, a Belgian astronomer who looked at stars during the night, and during the day he spent his time trying to understand human development. And he described physical development and created what we call today the body mass index. He described cognitive development, and he described moral development. And so this is statistical description of the age of people who were convicted of crimes in France at the beginning of the 19th century. So the age crime curve has been there for a long time, and still it didn't start with the Industrial Revolution. Manuel Eisner, a criminologist at Cambridge University, a few years ago, analyzed data on homicides in the 16th century, since the 16th century, in different cities in Europe, and showed that the age crime curve was there in at least starting from the 16th century. And one of my colleagues who's a primatologist who studies rhesus monkeys assures me that it's the same thing with monkeys, that they are kicked out of their group. The males are kicked out of their group during adolescence when they become intolerable. And they band together in the wild, and many of them die. So the phenomena is not new, and most societies throw a lot of money during that time to try to help these individuals. Now, one of the traditional explanations of this phenomena was described in a report to the United States National Academy of Sciences by a panel of specialists at the beginning of the 1990s. And it's summarized by this phrase: modern psychological perspectives emphasize that aggressive and violent behaviors are learned responses to frustrations. They can be also learned as instruments for achieving goals, and the learning occurs by observing models of such behavior. The models may be observed in the family, among peers, elsewhere in the neighborhood, through the mass media. So the idea is that we learn to be violent, and the learning takes time, and that's why it happens. It increases substantially during adolescence. This idea was taken up in a World Health Organization report a few years ago, their report on violence and health. And they write, the majority of young people who become violent are adolescent limited offenders who, in fact, show little or no evidence of high levels of aggression or other problem behaviors during their childhood. So it happens in adolescence, and we can't predict it from antecedent behavior. Another approach to the problem, to the age crime curve, is testosterone. This is a biological hypothesis where people have been saying, well, testosterone increases substantially during adolescence. And it increases more for males than for females. And once it reaches its peak in early adulthood, it starts decreasing. And so there is this idea also that violence during adolescence is due to hormones, and it's testosterone during adolescence. So in the early 1980s, these ideas were there, and with a few colleagues, we decided that we would do a longitudinal study to test these hypotheses. And so what we did was that we went to the schools in Montreal that were in the lowest socioeconomic areas. And we asked the teachers in kindergarten, in the kindergarten year, to assess all the boys. So all the boys from the 53 schools in the lowest socioeconomic areas were assessed. And then we followed them. They're now turning 31 years of age, and we are starting another data collection. Why boys? Because we know boys are much more at risk of delinquent and violent behavior in adolescence. And why boys from low socioeconomic areas? Because we knew at the time that they were more at risk of delinquent behavior. So each year we assess them up to age 17 using teacher report, peer reports, parent reports, self-reports, official files. We made on subsamples direct observations at home, at school, in the laboratory, and we did within that longitudinal study, a randomized controlled trial, and I will give you results about the different parts of this study in the first part of this presentation. So what did we observe? I start by the number of boys who were placed on what we called in Canada the Youth Offender Act. So they were officially considered by the juvenile court as juvenile delinquents. And so the judge made a decision of what should be done. So 15% of these boys from low socioeconomic areas were placed on the Young Offender Act. So 48 of them were placed but simply sent back home without supervision. 36 had supervision, and 29 were placed in a residential treatment center. When we looked at the criminal records between 18 and 25 years of age, close to 18% had a criminal record, 18% with violence, 31% property offenses, 16% drug offenses, and 34% other type of offenses. Now, the question we asked was, to what extent the fact that we tried to help them, and this study is done in the province of Quebec in Canada, which is the least punitive, juvenile justice system. It's really focused on trying to help them. What did we observe? If they were placed on the Young Offenders Act, they were 7 times more at risk of having a criminal condemnation between 18 and 24. If that placement on the Youth Offender Act was without supervision, they were only 2 times more at risk of becoming a criminal adult. If it had supervision, they were 14 times more at risk of becoming a criminal adult. And if they were placed in a residential setting, they were 38 times more at risk of becoming a criminal adult. So these data clearly shows that what we were doing in terms of help to these youth were not helping them in the long run. It was placing them much more at risk of becoming criminal offenders between 18 and 24. Now, I'll show you some of the data that we collected in terms of understanding their development. This is physical aggression, the frequency of physical aggression, mean level of frequency of physical aggression from the end of kindergarten to the end of elementary school and during adolescence. This is teacher report, this is self-report. And you can see that the trend, the mean level is decreasing with age from 6 to 13. And during adolescence, there is a slight hump here, but very slight hump. And so it's nothing near what we call the age crime curve. There's no indication that boys from low socioeconomic areas in Montreal were learning to physically aggress with age. the indication was they were unlearning to use physical aggression. But this is the mean level, and it's possible that the age crime curve is created by a subgroup of individuals who have low levels of physical aggression during the elementary school years and increase during adolescence. So to see that, you have to do analyses that are looking at different trajectories of development of physical aggression. And that's what we did with this sample. And what did we observe? Well, we observed that 14% of these boys from low socioeconomic areas almost never use physical aggression from 6 to 15. The majority, 52%, were following the mean level. Some physical aggression in kindergarten and decreasing in frequency with age. 28% were using physical aggression frequently in kindergarten, increased a little bit from 6 to 10, and then decreased with age. And finally, a group, 4%, who maintain high levels of physical aggression from kindergarten to adolescence. It's clear that there is no group that increases with age. And it's also clear that they are at their maximum in terms of frequency of physical aggression during kindergarten, not during adolescence. So from that type of data, it's pretty clear that it's not testosterone and it's not television, violence in television, that gets children to increase their level of physical aggression. The testosterone shoots in here and the physical aggression is decreasing. And with age, they're looking at more and more television, more and more violence, and physical aggression is not increasing. This study was replicated in many other countries, in Australia, New Zealand, the Netherlands, the United States. This is data from Pittsburgh, and it's a sample of poor black youth who were followed in a period where there was a lot of violence in the late 1990s in the United States. And you can see the same trends, that with age there is that decrease in physical aggression. There is an increase here, but it's those who were already highest at the start of adolescence. And we see that in every other sample that has been followed longitudinally. One of the important observations in that study and the other studies is that the children who are on a high trajectory of physical aggression in elementary school are the most at risk of school failure, of initiating early and abusing tobacco, alcohol, drugs, early sex, violence in adolescence, depression, unemployment, and poverty. If we can't deal with their problems, they end up having all these problems and many others. One of the intriguing results that we got when we tried to predict who were the individuals who maintained a high level physical aggression, and those who started high and decreased with age, the two best predictors were the level of education of their mother and the fact that their mother started having her children, the first child, when she was a teenager. And these are odds ratios at the level of 3 times more at risk. You multiply them, you're born from a girl who started having children when she was an adolescent, even though you're the third or the fourth born, and she has low education, you're 9 times more at risk of being on that high chronic trajectory of physical aggression. Now let's look at the results from the randomized control trial. What we decided when we started that study is that we would randomly allocate, they were 6 years old, a subgroup of the boys who were the most disruptive in kindergarten. So the boys who were aggressive, hyperactive in kindergarten, we randomly selected 50 of them and gave them a very intensive intervention over a 2-year period. And the intervention was home visitation, support to the parents, every third week over a 2-year period. Social skills training every week at school, where we were taking boys who had problems and putting them in groups of boys who did not have problems, who were in fact the most skilled, and teaching social skills problem. And we gave support to the teachers with the same approach that we were using with the parents. So we can compare those boys who received the intervention to the two other groups. This group is our true control. This group that we call attention control, we call them an attention control because we gave them as much attention as this group, but we were not trying to change their behavior. We were simply getting them to come to the laboratory so that we could observe the type of interactions they were having with peers, with their parents, etc. So now we can compare the treated group and the untreated group. They all had problems when they were in kindergarten. And what we saw was that when we compared the control to the treated, here we're talking about the trajectories of physical aggression, and these are low trajectories of physical aggression in adolescence, and these are medium and high trajectories. And what we saw was that the boys who benefited from the intervention were more likely to be on the low trajectory and were much more similar to the boys who did not have problems in kindergarten. Now, when they reached 24, we took the criminal records and also the school records to compare the control to the intervention, but also comparing them to those who did not have problems in kindergarten. And you can see that if we compare those who did not have problems, they were all boys from low socioeconomic areas, so only 53% of them finished high school, but those who were aggressive, hyperactive, only 32% finished high school. But if they got the intervention, it's 46% who finish high school. So the difference here is an important gain for those who have problems in kindergarten. And for criminal records, you see the same thing. If you were aggressive, hyperactive in kindergarten, you're 2 times more likely to have a criminal record. But if you get an intervention, you're less likely to have a criminal record. So, the conclusion from the data that I've been showing you now is that if you do the intervention with the aggressive boys in kindergarten, you decrease the likelihood of school dropout, juvenile delinquency, and adult criminality. And if you wait, you don't give the support, and you wait until they are adolescent, and then you try to do something during adolescence with those who are showing delinquency, you increase the likelihood of criminal behavior. Okay, so now we're going to go before kindergarten. I had never thought of aggression before kindergarten when I was doing these studies, and one day I said, what's going on before kindergarten? How come they're so aggressive in kindergarten? Is it kindergarten that makes them aggressive? And I should have read Bottle when I was a student at the University of London. He would have saved me about 20 years of misery. He says, he who considers things in their first growth and origin will obtain the clearest view of them. So I decided with colleagues to start a birth cohort so that we took a random sample of the newborns in the province of Quebec, and we've been following them with the first assessment at 5 months, and we're assessing them yearly. They're becoming adolescents this year. Again, we use parents, childcare providers, teachers, peers, children, official files to gather the information. We humans don't need to learn to fight for property. And most of the fighting in early childhood is related to toys, fighting for toys, fighting for space, fighting for the attention of adults. And children play fight. That's a lot of fun, and they smile and they have a lot of fun, but they really physically aggress each other. The trajectories that we observed in early childhood, we started measuring the frequency of physical aggression at 17 months. Another team has been looking at 12 months, and it starts a little bit lower, but the physical aggression is there at 12 months. We see 3 trajectories. 32% who use physical aggression, but not very frequently. Between 17 months and 60 months, there is a slight increase and a decrease. The majority use physical aggression more and more frequently from 17 months to 42 months, and then it starts decreasing. And finally, a minority, but it's a large minority, 17%, increase with age, show high frequency of physical aggression and decrease. When we put together the data from 17 months to 6 years, and from the other sample from 6 years to 21 years, this is what we see. We see that we've all used physical aggression in early childhood. The peak is between 2 and 4.5, and everybody decreases with age, but some use it much more frequently in early childhood, and those who use it more frequently in early childhood are more at risk of maintaining that high level. So we learn with age not to use physical aggression. We learn to use alternatives to physical aggression, and some learn it better, faster than others. So the conclusion for the descriptive trajectory of physical aggression is that humans do not learn to physically aggress. They learn not to physically aggress. The worst form of behavior problems, that is with physical aggression, is very rarely late onset in adolescence. Suddenly someone starts to be aggressive without never having been aggressive. We don't see that when we follow people over time. From the available evidence, this may be true for the other behavior problems like rule breaking, stealing, destruction of property. These behaviors have not been studied properly in early childhood. But from the information that we've been gathering, it looks like we are at worst in terms of rule breaking, stealing, and destruction of property in early childhood. Although the large majority learn to behave, socialization is a thin veneer that can always break under pressure, thus the importance of situational prevention. I won't go into much detail about this. We can discuss it afterwards, but it's important to realize, because we've all done it, although we learn to control ourselves, it's always possible that the situation will bring back the aggression. So that sometimes we say, well, this person was never aggressive and suddenly blew up. Yes, it's possible. But it's not that this person has never been aggressive. We know that that person was aggressive in early childhood, learned to control herself, but things happen, and so we need to prevent the violence that will come back, and that's called situational prevention. But what I'm talking about today is developmental prevention, where we can intervene to help individuals who appear to be at high risk of maintaining that high level of physical aggression. I'll skip this. I realize that time is going by, so we can talk about Aristotle another time. So now once we described these development, we obviously became interested in the causes. And the causes are genes, environment, and gene and environment, that's now called epigenetics. And I'm going to give you results on epigenetics, and it's important to understand that the modern epigenetic idea was invented here in Edinburgh by a man, a geneticist, who was called Waddington. He was a little bit ahead of his time. So we've been following twins. That's part of the longitudinal study with the bird cohort. We have 500 pairs of twins, that's 1,000 twins, that we've been following from early childhood with the same type of assessments that we do with the singletons. And what we saw when we assessed them at 17 months of age was that the monozygotic twins, the twins who are identical, the twins who have the same genes, the reason they look identical is because they have the same genes. And if you study behavior, if they have this, they behave in the same way, it gives you an idea that it's probably genetics. And if you compare them to twins who are dizygotic, who are simply brothers or sisters, they share only half of their genes, it tells you that it's not the environment, it's the genes. So when we compare these two groups, the monozygotic twins and the dizygotic twins, what we see is that the monozygotic twins are much more similar at 17 months on the frequency of physical aggression. And if you calculate what people call heritability, you come up with 82% of the variation in the frequency of physical aggression appears at 17 months to have a genetic origin. This is only to compare with language. When we look for language, the children, the twins, monozygotic twins, are much more similar, but the dizygotic twins also are much more similar. So the genetic effect appears to be more important for physical aggression than language development. Now, what in the environment appears to be leading to chronic physical aggression in early childhood? Well, mother's history of problem behavior before they started having children is one of the important predictors. Being a young mother at the birth of your first child, as we saw before, having a low education, being a single parent before the child is born, living in poverty, and smoking during pregnancy are the best predictors during pregnancy. When we assess them at birth, between birth and 6 months of age, obstetrical complication is an important predictor. Mother being coercive towards her 5-month-old is a good predictor. Poor marital relationships and mothers that are depressive, that have a history of depression. So all these are significant predictors of being on that high chronic trajectory. Avshalom Caspi and his colleagues used the longitudinal study of bird cohort in New Zealand to show that genetic effects can be traced here to it's a gene that codes for monoamine oxidase activity. And essentially what this is saying is that if you live in a very bad environment and you have the short version of that gene, you're more at risk of becoming violent than if you have the long version of the gene. But what is driving this, in fact, is mainly the maltreating environment. So the environment effect is much greater than the genetic effect, which acts as a means of preventing the risk to a certain extent. But looking at one gene at a time is becoming less and less popular because it's clear that it doesn't make sense that these complex behaviors are driven by one gene. And this is where we get to epigenetics. And my colleagues in Montreal with Jonathan Seckel, who is from Edinburgh University, published a paper a few years ago using rats. and showing that maternal behavior with young newborn rats was important in the development of the reaction to stress. And the importance of that behavior was through its effect on gene expression. So the rat mother licks her rat pups more or less. The mothers who lick more compared to the mother who lick least have a very different effect on the chemistry that activates the gene or does not activate the genes. And if the genes are not activated, then your brain doesn't develop properly and you have a hard time handling stress. So the results of that study were showing that it's not the genes that you have, but it's the effect of the environment on the genes, whether they are turned on or off. More recently, the same team published a paper showing that this type of phenomena can be observed with humans if you take the brains of people who committed suicide and you compare people who committed suicide who were abused in childhood and those who were not abused in childhood, you could see important gene expression differences in their brains. Now, with our subjects, we don't have access to their brains yet. But we can take blood, and with blood we can study gene expression. And that's what we've been doing recently. Now, this is data from the rats. And every black spot here is indicating a gene that is not expressed. The white spots are genes that are expressed. And here we have a rat that was not well licked by his mother in early childhood. Here you have a rat that was well licked, and you can see the difference. When we're talking about epigenetics, gene expression, this is what we are talking about. It's genes that are turned on or off. Now, when we look at our subjects, our boys, these are the boys on the high trajectory of physical aggression, and these are boys on the normal trajectory. And you can see the difference in the number of black spots. There's much more genes that are not expressed in the boys that are on that high trajectory compared to the boys who are on the low trajectory. Now we're looking at all the genes, all the chromosomes, and we see different patterns of gene expression when we are comparing aggressive and non-aggressive children. And this is an indication not that they have bad genes, but the effect of the environment on gene expression. We also do brain imaging, and we've shown that the boys on the high trajectory have a different capacity in terms of serotonin synthesis in their frontal lobes. And this is well known to be a problem, causing problems of cognitive function, being able to control your emotions. So the conclusions from that work on the causes, the possible causes, is that there are causes that are linked to the genes you inherit. But there is also the effect of the prenatal environment on the expression of your genes, and there is the effect of the postnatal environment on the expression of your genes. And there is obviously also the learning experiences that you get from your environment in early childhood. So this is a model that shows how this thing appears to work. What are the consequences for early prevention of chronic physical aggression? Well, over the past 25 years, there have been not a large number, but some studies that have shown that support to parenting from pregnancy and onwards during early childhood have an impact, a long-term impact. And when we say long-term impact, we're talking about 15, 20 years down the line. Parent support has an impact, a long-term impact on your development. And support to parenting and daycare, and these are all randomized controlled trials, are showing long-term impacts of intervention on school success, on prevention of violence, on being able to integrate the job market, on all sorts of good things. Now, what we are doing, we've started doing a few years ago, is what we call a new generation of randomized controlled trials, where we are doing these interventions. We take, during pregnancy, high-risk pregnant women. You've seen, we know the characteristics of the young women who are at risk of having children who have behavior problems. So the idea is simply to give them support during pregnancy and during the early years, and then look at its impact, looking at the impact in the cord blood at birth to be able to see the effects on gene expression. We can look at the effects on brain development, and we can see the effects over time on behavior development. So, conclusions. Humans do not learn to physically aggress. From their environment, they learn alternatives to physical aggression. Environmental effects on development of physical aggression, like genetic effects, are strongly intergenerational and highly linked to maternal development. If this is true, prevention of chronic physical aggression should probably start at conception at the latest. And I say that in the sense, we can discuss that, in the sense that I've been talking about males having these problem behaviors, but at the same time talking about mothers having problems and having males who are on that high physical aggression trajectory. And I think that we focus too much on the males, and we need to help the girls get their act together so that they will, when they become pregnant, take better care of themselves, and the better care they will give to themselves will have an impact on the development of both their daughters and their sons. Interventions with mothers from pregnancy target the natural intergenerational system. The longer we wait to help, the more costly and the less likely the returns. And this is what Jay Meckman, an economist who won a Nobel Prize for his methodological study and became interested in early childhood. In his studies, he's showing that the interventions that start early give the best return. The longer you wait, it's not that you're not having an impact, but the impact is much less important. And at a certain point, as you can see, especially in adolescence with juvenile delinquents, the interventions are having the reverse of the effect. So the investment that we make in adolescent is creating us more problem than it is solving. This was essentially what I told you tonight was said in one phrase by Thomas Hobbes in his book On the Citizen. Unless you give infants everything they want, they cry and get angry. They even beat their own parents. Thus, an evil man is rather like a sturdy boy, or a man of childish mind. And evil is simply want of reason at an age when it normally accrues to men by nature, governed by discipline and experience of harm. So the genes and the environment, the quality of the environment, Hobbes understood that. Where did he take it? Well, from Erasmus. We should be especially careful with our children during their first years, for at this stage their behavior is guided by instinct more than by reason, so that they are inclined equally to good and evil, more to the latter perhaps. And it is always easier to forget good habits than to unlearn bad ones. This truth was already known to pagan philosophers and caused them great perplexity. So the story I'm telling you that comes from the data that we've been collecting over 30 years, the wise men have known this for a very long time. Thank you.